Hi, welcome back. So in the last video, we did a quick intro to COMSOL, which is analyzing a single coil. And now we're going to actually model a whole transformer. So this will be a toroidal transformer with two windings, fairly simple. And this will just be modeling it. And then in the next video, we'll look in the analysis. But let's check it out. Okay, so here we are in COMSOL 6.1. We're going to make a blank model. And first thing to do is add a component. I'm going to do 3D. And then up here in the parameters, I like to start by filling out some variables that we're going to use. So I'm going to put in here some of the dimensions of the core and the wire to start. So I filled out a couple parameters for the core and for the wire. So you'll notice this is for the core, I'm just using this core that I used for the example for ANSYS. You can see it's 200 relative permeability, and then it has these dimensions right here, which I've entered in here as parameters. Outer diameter, the inner diameter, the height, and the permeability. Notice to do units, you use these little brackets right here. Here I'm using just a 26 gauge wire. I just use this wire calculator here and copied this millimeters number into here. And notice you can also do equations in this here, expressions. So now we can get into the geometry. Go down here. First thing we can do is change this to millimeters. And let's start with the core. So we're going to make a work plane. We're going to make a 2D cross section of the core in this work plane, and then we can revolve it to make the 3D core. So on here we can make a rectangle. What we're trying to do now is create this cross section here, and it's going to be spaced over in the X by this amount from the middle. The width is going to be core outer diameter minus core inner diameter, and we'll divide that by 2. And then the height is just going to be core height. So the amount that we're going to offset it now is going to be half of the inner diameter, because we're basing it on the corner here. So we can do core inner diameter divided by 2. And then to see if that works, we can build selected. So it looks like that worked. We have the outer diameter here. Outer diameter is 12.7, so the radius is 6 something. The inner is a 7.2, so radius is 3 something, and then we have the 4.75 height. So the next thing to do is some fillets on these edges. So we can right click here, and we're going to add fillet. To add the fillet right here, you're doing the vertices. You have to add into this. So make sure this is green, and then click on all the vertices you want to add. I'm doing all 4 corners, and I just have to make something up here. Let's try 0.5 millimeter. This is just to add a little roundness to the edge. You could try 1. 1's too much. I think 0.5 is fine. So the next thing we want to do is revolve the whole work plane. So we can go back up to this geometry level here, because we want this above the work plane. Do revolve. These defaults look pretty good. We have this work plane already selected. One thing I like to do is uncheck keep original faces. And we're doing around Y here. So we'll just go ahead and build that. All right, there it is. So to center on that, we can zoom extents here, and then we can move that around by clicking and dragging. So you could orient this in the XY instead of XZ. It might make a little more sense, but it doesn't really matter, so we're just going to keep going with it. You can name these. So it looks like revolve is under this work plane, so it's revolving that work plane. So you could name these things like this is the main transformer here. This is the core. And we're going to add another work plane. This one's going to be for the wire. So here we want to make another rectangle. Do that inside of this plane geometry. Well, as a square, so if you do Control Z, you can undo stuff, pretty much everything you can undo. Of this rectangle, and we want to space it. Basically, we're going to do the same thing as we did for the core, but we're going to make it outside of here. And I want to space it a little bit extra to take the core coating and the wire insulation into account. So I'm going to go back to parameters. I'm going to add here, let's see, core, do C for coating, and we'll just make that 0.05 millimeters. And we'll do I for insulation. We'll make that 0.1 millimeters. So I'm going to add another one in here. I'm just going to call it wire center R, and that'll just be the spacing of the wire off of here. So that's going to take into account this wire radius and this core coating in this wire insulation. The other thing is, I think I'm going to make one for the core width, which we actually already calculated. So I can just go back to the rectangle we made previously here. And this is the width. I'll leave that one in there. But we can go back to the parameters. Yep, it's gone. Core width. So now I'll copy this one. Remember core width. So if we go back here, we have the width of this thing is going to be core width plus 2 times the wire center calculation. The height is just going to be the core. You can do control space, and that'll show you what fill-ins that has for your variables. So HT was core height. That's also plus 2 times the wire center. Now here we can do this corner or center. If we do that on the center, we need to offset it from here out to the center of this. So we have core outer diameter plus core inner diameter divided by 2 to get us from here to the middle of this. And then core height over 2 to get us up here. So let's try that. All right, almost. So the outer plus the inner divided by 2 gives us from here to here. We want half of that, so we actually have to divide it by 4. Let's try that. Okay, looks a little better. So holding control and scrolling to zoom. Now we want to do a fillet on this one, just like the other one. So we're going to add here, fillet. Do the same thing we did before, all 4 corners. Do the same 0.5 millimeters. So this looks all right, but it'd be a little nicer if this vertex was more like down here. So this curve was a little larger. So we're going to add here, we just need to add the spacing. So control space, wire center. So now these guys line up. Next, we want to convert this to a curve. So we can go in here to conversions, convert to curve. We want to select this whole thing here. We can leave this unchecked, keep input objects, build selected, and now this is a curve. So what we're going to do is rotate part of this curve outwards, and then we'll have one coil that's sort of offset, and we can put that around the core. So go to transformer, right click, conversion split. Now we have the split, and we can select this curve and split it. Now see, it's got individual pieces. We can do the rotate now, Now we can just select these top three. So we want to rotate this way, so it's around the y-axis in our case. And the angle of rotation, so we want to rotate around the center, so we're going to rotate this around the center here. The angle, we basically want to fill up the whole thing with however many turns we want. So I think, let's go back to the parameters here. We'll make a new parameter for how many turns. We'll call it NP for primary turns, and say 10. And then NS for secondary turns. Let's just do 10 for both right now. And it's kind of nice to parameterize all these things because you can go back and change the parameters and then rebuild everything pretty quickly if you want to make updates. So now that we're back to the rotate, the angle here is going to be 360 degrees divided by NP. We'll see what that does. So I think that looks good. So we just need to reconnect this. We need to remove this piece, reconnect to here. I can right click on here and do delete. See how it's on boundaries right now? I can't select that. We need to get this drop down to edge. We can select this, build selected, so now that's been deleted. We can do here, more primitives, we want a line segment. So vertex, start segment, see this is green, so we're doing the start segment. It's going to be this dot. The end, we got to click here. End vertex is this dot. And now we can build the selected. So there it is. So next I want to connect these all back together. So kind of unsplit them. So go in here to Booleans and partitions. We want a union. And now we can select all of these to merge together. So we want to just drag to rotate around. So now we've got all these connected together. So I'm going to uncheck this keep interior boundaries. Make sure this input objects as well. We don't need any extra geometry floating around. So now that's merged back together and it's a single piece. So now we're going to right click on the transformer, do transforms, rotate. So we're going to select this wire, rotate around the y-axis. So we want to do this in multiple steps in a range. So they have this little range sort of builder here. And you can tell it where you want it to start. 0. We want to step by 360 divided by NP degrees like before. We want to stop at 360 minus NP. So 1 turn less. And we can add that. So this is the actual, didn't quite do this correctly. We got to get rid of this 0 here. This is the actual code. You could just write this range and then there's 3 inputs to it. Now we build that. All right. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So now what we need to do is disconnect part of this so that we can have a input connection. So we can extend this out so there's a couple of wires for input and output. You can do that by deleting a couple of these. And I think we're going to need, okay, so we can delete these 3 edges. Now we have a connection here. Now we just need to extend these out a little bit. So one way to do that is just by adding some points and connecting it with a line. So let's add a point, primitives, point. So for this bottom point out here, Z is going to be 0. And y is going to be, since 0 is the bottom of the core, it's going to be minus the wire spacing. So it's not giving me anything for that parameter. Let's see. Wire center R. And Z, if this is somewhere around 5, so let's just put 6 and see what that looks like. Oh, here it is. So it got put up here for some reason. Okay, so Z is supposed to be 0 and X is supposed to be 6. Okay, so that's not very far out. So let's make it 7. See how that looks? It's getting a little better. It will make 8. Okay, so that looks pretty good. All right, so now we're going to do a line. Connect these guys again. Second vertex. So that looks pretty good. Just have to do the same thing here for this bottom one, which I think is actually the top one because I kind of moved everything around. But so this one here is going to be the height plus that offset, and then we'll just make the x8 again. So what we're going to do now is create a new work plane that's going to be kind of where this grid is, and then on that we can make the cross section of the wire that'll be centered on one of these wires, and then we can have it use the cross section in this path to create the wire. So we're going to do a new work plane, and this plane we need to position over here in line with these wires. So that'd be a YZ plane, and it's going to be offset by 8 millimeters. Now on that plane, we want to create a circle. This is going to be the cross section of the wire. AWG26 wire radius. Now we want to move it so that it's on one of these points. So the Y is going to be 0. Looks like this bottom one might be the easiest. We'll just put here minus wire, it's the center radius. There we go. So now we have a circle on there. So to turn that into a 3D wire, we can go to Transformers and Sweep. So Sweep takes a face and an edge, and it sweeps the face along the edge to create a 3D object. So the face is this little face that we just made down here, cross section of the wire. We click down on edge. So now edge is going to be all of these sections here. So it's going to be easiest if we merge all those first. So I'm going to undo this and put in here union. Just going to go through and select all of these. If you accidentally select something, just click it again to deselect it. So now we can add the sweep, get the face, and get this edge to follow. Okay, so it looks like that union didn't really help me select the edges. So what I'm going to do is hide. I want to hide the core. So we're going to select here, objects. There we go. So now the core is out of the way. So what I can do is escape, and I can do the selection box. So we want to go back to following edges And selection box. I'm going to make sure I don't get all the edges of this little circle here. So now we have all the edges of this selected. And we can do smooth edge, that's fine. Keep input object. So I'm going to deselect this because I want to get rid of all of these objects once I make the wire. And twist compensation, that's good. If you don't use that, it looks a little funkier during these transitions here. Now let's try that. Boom. All right. We've got a wire. Now if we want to bring the core back, we can click on Reset Hiding. Are you sure? Yes. So this is pretty good. If we change this to Object Selection. So one nice thing I guess about this union is I think it made it so that now this is one solid object. Or maybe that didn't. I'm not sure. But anyway, what we want to do now is copy this whole thing to make the secondary, and we'll just rotate it a little bit. So we'll do here. We're just going to do transforms, rotate. Now this is the object we're selecting. Rotate it around the y-axis. And then we do this again here. We're going to start at 0. This time we're going to step it at 360 divided by 2 NP. Or we want to do, I guess, half of a turn here so that it's just right there. And we're going to stop at just 1. Okay, so now we'll add that. And there it is. I want the other direction. But now we have 2 coils. Here's our primary. Here's our secondary. All right, so the last thing we're going to do is add a cube of air. It doesn't really run the simulation very well if you don't have a cube of air. So we'll make it like 20 millimeters on each side. And let's see. If we want it to really be centered, we would want to raise it in the Y direction by the core height over 2. So let's see what that does. Okay, we did the corner, so let's do the center. There we go. Now, there it is. This kind of takes up a lot of the space. So what we can do here is either do the wireframe view, or we can do this hide button here, and we can hide it. Note that when you hide stuff like that, it puts it over here in the definitions under views or hide. So you can click on this to hide or unhide that. You can also right click and you can disable stuff. So that's it for creating the geometry. Next step is going to be materials and setting up the analysis, and we'll pick that up in the next video. Thanks for watching.